What is your position on take-home cars?
I think currently, take-home program that the Sheriff's Office has, kind of based on the Indianapolis model, which basically is the cars going home in the community. Cars are allowed out of the county right now. And those cars are driven, the furthest they're driven out of the county is to the Snapper Creek Service Plaza, which is from the county line 38 miles one way. And I see people shaking their heads in the audience right now. And I understand that that might be something that citizens have an issue with. But I want you to understand, being in the Upper Keys, 50% of the officers that work in the Upper Keys, Alamorada and Key Largo, live out of county. That's 50% of your current employees. We're losing 10.5% of our officers every year. It costs a lot of money to retrain those officers. That's a benefit for them to have those cars out of the county, and I understand your concern about them leaving the county and the cost, the expense of gas. But also understand, the same distance we're talking about, 38 miles to Snapper Creek, which is the furthest they go if they're stationed up here in the Upper Keys. A sergeant who works in Key Largo, whose duty station is at the 102, who has to report there, who lives in Marathon, drives 48 miles each way, back and forth to their house. Just hear me out on this, because I know it's not a popular thing to say. The officer in the county is putting more mileage on the car than the officer taking it out of the county is. I realize you're concerned, and I'm concerned about the cost that this is causing the taxpayers also. But I just hate to see us handcuff ourselves with our hiring pool if we're already losing so many officers a year, and we're already having to pay so much money to retrain new officers. To take that away from those officers out of the county right now, when we're not competing with other agencies to get officers, we're just not competing. Somebody mentioned earlier that the turnover rate was the lowest it's been in 10 years, and that's true. 10.5%, and that's an increase. And it's been improving ever since 2007. But I don't think there's a person in this room that doesn't know what happened in 2007. 2007, 2008, this country went through the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. Other agencies aren't hiring, and that's why the turnover rate has slowed down here in Monroe County. 10.8%, or 10.6, 10.5% now, our best in 10 years, is great, it's improving. But let's look at other agencies that we're competing with. Look at Miami-Dade. What was their turnover rate last year? And just off the top of my head, sorry, I have it written down here. Their turnover rate was less than 3%. Palm Beach, less than 3%. Broward County, less than 2%. That's the turnover rate at agencies we're competing against. We're not going to get the best of the best if we take away this benefit. I think there are other ways to deal with that right now until we get competitive and start keeping our officers and saving that money. We can start Miami-Dade. If you live in Miami-Dade and you want to take, or you work in Miami-Dade and you want to take your patrol car to Monroe County, you pay $50 every 2 weeks to the county. So, I mean, there's other options. I understand everybody's concerned about the cars leaving the county. I'm concerned about it too. I just hate to handcuff ourselves in recruiting and retention of deputies. Thanks. I'm just kidding.
That's the downside of random. It can happen.
I approve of the current take-home policy for a lot of the reasons that he was talking about. If we want to keep officers working in Monroe County and get officers to apply to Monroe County, we do have to offer them something, because it's much easier for them to stay in Dade County. Now the thing is that you didn't mention is when they take their cars home, they're not allowed to use their cars. It's strictly to drive home and drive back. If you leave Monroe County, you're not allowed to use your car off duty. So they're merely driving home, and the majority of these officers are only driving to Homestead. And like he said, there's officers that work up here that live in Marathon and some further, and they're actually putting more miles on the car driving home, and they live within the county. But as the policy stands right now, I do agree with it, and I would keep it at this time. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, with the current take-home policy, there's a couple things you need to understand. Some people are asking, why don't you leave cars at the station, and when they drive their personal vehicles to work, they jump in, county car, and they do the thing. It's called hot seating. Hot seating, there's been studies done that wear and tear and life expectancy of the car doesn't last as long as you assign it to somebody. Now, with that said, price of gas. Who knows what it's going to be next month? Just between the upper keys and the lower keys, it's almost 40 cents a gallon difference. Believe it or not. We've been fueling up here instead of down there as much as we can. Sheriff's Office has a number of unmarked vehicles. They're in the hands of employees and in charge of different divisions, their lieutenants, their directors. And they're running these cars back and forth instead of having a motor vehicle pool set up. I'm in favor of taking those vehicles away, setting up a motor pool. They can drive their personal cars to work. Jump in a motor pool car and go about their business, whatever they need to do in order to cut costs and save money. I also think that somewhere down the road in the near future, that if I'm sheriff, I'm going to look at taking the cars out of the county and personal use of our county vehicles. I feel it's important. You're trying to set up a line item budget to figure out what your costs are going to be for the year. What do you budget gas at per gallon? $3.50 a gallon, $5 a gallon, where do you go with it? We need to kind of reduce the mileage on the cars, we need to make them last longer, and I think we need to look out for our taxpayers' money.
Just want to touch real fast on what Bill talked about in regards to the retention of employees and the rate. Yes, he's right, the economic turnaround did have some impact, but our turnover rate has steadily been declining for the last 12 years. So well before the economic turndown, you saw a sharp rise or decrease in the sheriff's office, people leaving. So that started way before. That could be a contributing factor without question. But also when you factor in 10.5, that 10.5 is just not officers leaving, that's officers retiring, leaving for whatever reasons. People that the job just wasn't for them, some are terminated for a cause. Take consideration a lot of factors that help to make that 10.5, not just that someone left for another job. But the question, the take-home program, as an overall, I like and agree with the program. Like earlier we talked about, it's called the Indianapolis program. There were studies done about the programs to determine the viability of a take-home car versus what Tom talked about, a hot-seated car. The space you come in, you run your shift, and you pass the keys off to somebody else. What happens is, what he was saying is correct, you burn a car out. In a year and a half, you have 100-something thousand miles on the car. The cars look like garbage. It's hard to keep someone accountable for the damage, hot hamburgers under the seats. But the program itself right now is very good that we think it's a crime deterrent, as does the Indianapolis Take-Home program. It puts cars in your neighborhoods, which helps to deter crime. When you have police officers that are living there, and this thing we talked about, some do live out of county, but the cars in county for sure are deterrents. Plus, our officers are in county are allowed to use those cars off duty, but they're required to check on the air, have a gun, badge, and equipment, and they're required to take action. In the event they see something, or there's something on the radio, they're required to take action if need be, back up an officer. If they see something happening, deal with it into a zone car, an on-duty officer gets there to take care of it. So that's an extra layer of patrols, visibilities, eyes are on the road. Now the biggest question really is, I think, the use of the cars to drive out of county. Because like my opponents talked about, the price of fuel has been up and down and could be going up. When the program first started, it was probably 20 years ago. And probably about 15 to 20 years ago, thereabouts, they implemented the ability for officers to take the car out of county. Years ago you couldn't, but we only had about 6 officers that lived in the very South Dade area. They lived in Florida City, South Homestead. And these officers, driving back and forth, I told the sheriff at one point in time that they could no longer afford to keep driving the personal cars, and they were going to quit and leave. Back then, there was not much of an applicant pool, and these are good qualified men and women. The sheriff back then didn't want to lose. For 6 people, just to go to South Homestead, it was worth it. Unfortunately, the number of officers that are living in Monroe, out of Monroe, have morphed. Just like we talked about, 50+% of the Upper Keys officers live in Dade. And those officers have moved further north. Instead of living in Florida City and South Dade, now they're in North Dade. or even in my years, where we had to put a cap on how far we let that car go. I put that cap at where we talked about, the 38-mile mark. We had people that were even living in Broward, wanted to drive our cars to Broward, and I wouldn't let them. But I will tell you, because we have had the increase of officers moving out of county or wanting to get jobs from out of county, and because the price of fuel, myself and the sheriff, along with the collective bargaining unit from Fraternal Order Police, have put the stuff in place effective June 1. Anybody hired now is not allowed to take a take-home car out of this county. Anybody after June 1 who moves from Monroe to Dade is not allowed to take a car out of county. So that's some steps we were taking to try to rein in and be proactive for potential further problems with the fuel and other problems associated with the cars going out of county. Thank you.
Well, it's hard to touch on things that they've so eloquently already pointed out. However, what I would say, in addition to what Colonel Ramsey said, is that the big impact I think most of us have is the county use of the vehicles outside the county, because you know, for most people, seeing those cars drive up and down Dade County do not service the citizens of Monroe County as a crime deterrent or otherwise, or do they serve any other purpose except for benefiting that particular officer, not the community as a whole. And what I say is an overall problematic indicator, as both Ramsey and Bill has said, is a lot of our officers are living out of the county, as much as 50% of those that work in Alamorada and in Key Largo. My point of view is that in itself is a problem. It is part of the same issue about the morale and turnover, etc. They're all interconnected and combined, because for every officer that moves out of Monroe County and is living in Dade County, that money, whatever salary they make, they take that salary with them and spend it outside of our community. Those are our tax dollars, folks. Okay, we should be building and set up academic school systems, gearing them more towards our Explorer programs or Reserve programs, etc., and finding jobs for our children and our children's children, as well as if in fact we're going to accept a candidate that wants to come and work from another county, that he move here. Okay, stake is stakes here, so there's stakeholders in the game with each and every one of us that live here now, because you cannot convince me that an employee, currently we work 12-hour shifts. Okay, they're doing at least a 3 to 4 hour turnaround, which makes that every workday a 16-hour workday. It makes supervising those employees tremendously difficult to drive around, because I do that job. Matter of fact, I'm supposed to be doing it right now. I'm remiss in my duties. But towards the end of that shift, I got to drive around and slap them silly. Get them out and do, side straddle hops and push-ups or whatever it takes to make it through that workday, and not just that workday, but to get safely home. And the question is, folks, is how are we going to solve these problems? It's not, like it was mentioned earlier, fuel prices, we can't figure out what that's going to be from year to year, but we can figure out that if that employee lives and works in our community, problem solved. Thank you.